The girl's scream was silent. 1 second, she was the gilded princess of a New York financial empire, sitting opposite her father in the city's most exclusive restaurant. The next, her body arched backward in the velvet chair, a soundless O of terror frozen on her lips. Her hands, adorned with delicate gold rings, flew to her chest, her fingers clawing at the fine silk of her dress as if to rip out her own heart. Her breath hitched, a series of short, sharp gasps that were utterly swallowed by the opulent hush of the dining room. Her father, Julian Croft, a man whose name could move markets and topple governments, was on his feet in an instant, his chair scraping violently against the polished marble floor. "Isabella! Bella, what is it?" His voice, usually a low baritone of command, was a raw, splintered thing. Heads turned. A champagne flute wobbled and fell, shattering on the floor with a sound like a gunshot. A woman gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. "Someone help my daughter!" Julian roared, his composure, as legendary as his fortune, disintegrating into pure, primal fear. But here was the thing. His daughter hadn't just lost her voice. For the past 6 months, Isabella Croft had been suffering from a mysterious affliction that had baffled 23 of the world's top specialists. It wasn't an allergy. It wasn't a neurological disorder. It wasn't a known psychological condition. They had run every test, scanned every cell, spent over $5 million searching for an answer. Nothing. Now, she was dying on the floor of Aurelia, the 3 Michelin star temple of gastronomy, and the only sound she could make was the frantic, desperate drumming of her heels against the leg of the table. Across the room, a waitress stood frozen, a silver water pitcher trembling in her hand. Her name was Ilara Vance. She wore a crisp black uniform that was a size too big and served overpriced tasting menus to pay the rent on a shoebox apartment in Queens. But 5 years ago, she was Elena Vance, a forensic accountant, so brilliant, so unerringly precise. They called her the Oracle at Sterling and Ross. She didn't just balance books. She read them like novels, finding the lies hidden between the numbers. She could trace a single phantom dollar through a labyrinth of shell corporations across 3 continents, until the day they destroyed her career, stripped her of her license, and framed her for the very fraud she had uncovered. The man screaming on the floor, the man whose daughter was turning a terrifying shade of blue, was the one who had signed the order to destroy her. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic prisoner. Her hands shook, splashing icy water onto the pristine white tablecloth of Table 7. Every instinct, honed by 5 years of survival in the shadows, screamed at her to run, to fade back into the kitchen, to remain invisible. Because if she helped, if she revealed what she saw, not with a doctor's eye, but with an accountant's, they would ask questions, and questions were a luxury she could not afford. The answers would lead them to a past that could still send her to prison. But Isabella's lips were now a dusky purple. 90 seconds. Maybe less. That's all the oxygen her brain had left. What Julian Croft didn't know was that the broken waitress watching his daughter suffocate was the only person in the world who understood the pattern. What Ilara didn't know was that this single moment would unravel a conspiracy 5 years in the making and expose a secret buried in the heart of the Croft family fortune. She took 1 step forward, then another. Her voice, when it came, cut through the rising tide of panic with the cold, clean precision of a diamond blade. "Get the money away from her." Everyone froze. The command was so bizarre, so out of place, it shocked the chaos into silence. Julian whipped his head around, his eyes wild with a mixture of grief and fury. "What did you say? You're a waitress." "Her purse!" Ilara's voice was steel. "Your wallet! The credit cards on the table. Get it all away from her. Now." For one terrible, stretched-out second, no one moved. Julian Croft stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. And in the eyes of the nobody who'd been refilling his water glass 10 minutes ago, he saw an authority more absolute than his own. "Before I tell you what happened next, answer me this. Could you step forward, knowing it could mean your own destruction? Could you save the child of the man who took everything from you, not out of forgiveness, but because you were the only one who could?" Drop your answer below. Be honest. And hit subscribe right now, because the pattern this waitress saw, the 123 world-class doctors missed, isn't in a medical textbook. It's in a balance sheet. This isn't just a story about a medical mystery. It's a story about invisible wounds, the currency of guilt, and the moment when staying silent costs more than speaking the truth. The clock was ticking. Isabella's life was measured in seconds, and Ilara Vance was done being invisible. 6 hours before Isabella Croft collapsed, Ilara Vance's alarm clock shrieked at 4:30 a.m. She silenced it with a practiced slap and lay in the pre-dawn gloom of her tiny apartment, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with her eyes. They branched out like a river delta, a road map to nowhere. Before she even opened the banking app on her phone, the numbers glowed behind her eyelids, stark and unforgiving. Balance, $287.14. Rent due in 3 days, $1,450. Her mother's nursing home bill, a monthly guillotine, $500 and $800. The mountain of legal debt, a monument to her ruined life, $412,000. The numbers never added up. They hadn't for 5 years. By 6 a.m., she was on the subway, heading into Manhattan. The train rattled and screeched, a mechanical beast groaning under the city's weight. She clutched a worn copy of The Principles of Fraud Examination, its pages soft as cloth, the margins filled with her own frantic, spidery notes. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, a younger woman with bright, hopeful eyes, dressed in a sharp business suit, shaking hands with the CEO of Sterling and Ross. The headline from the company newsletter read, "Elena Vance promoted to senior forensic partner." She had been 29. She felt 100 now. She pushed through the service entrance of Aurelia into a wall of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the scent of roasting garlic, simmering veal stock, and the sharp, metallic tang of ambition. Her stomach clenched with hunger. She'd had a bowl of oatmeal for dinner last night, meticulously measuring the oats to make the canister last the week. In the staff changing room, she pulled on the starched black uniform. It felt like a costume, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. 5 years, and the cheap polyester still chafed against her skin. "Morning, Vance." Dimitri, the restaurant's manager, a man who moved with the nervous energy of a hummingbird, bustled past, clipboard in hand. "Big night. We've got the Japanese trade delegation at 8, and the Croft party at 7:30. You're on the Croft table. Be sharp. The man tips like a king, but notices everything." Most servers would be thrilled. A big tip from Julian Croft could cover half her rent. For Ilara, the name was a punch to the gut. She just nodded, her face an impassive mask. The dinner service began, a symphony of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. Ilara moved through the dining room with an unnatural efficiency. Table 3, a couple on a first date, nervous and trying too hard. She saw the man's watch was a knockoff, his suit rented. He was punching above his weight. Table 9, a family celebrating a college graduation. The father's smile was strained. She could see the faint tremor in his hand as he signed the check. He was likely dipping into his retirement savings for this meal. She didn't need to be an accountant to see these things anymore. She saw patterns of stress and pretense everywhere. Her mind was a relentless calculator of human desperation. Sometimes, when a customer was particularly demanding, or Dimitri was barking orders, her fingers would twitch. Unconscious, phantom gestures. Tapping a 10 key, underlining a discrepancy, the muscle memory of a life she was no longer allowed to live. At table 5, a regular, Mr. Abernathy, was meeting with his wealth manager. Ilara approached to refill their water glasses. And if we shift the assets into the Cayman subsidiary before the end of the quarter, we can write down the acquisition cost as a capital loss, effectively zeroing out the tax liability, the manager was saying, his voice a smug whisper. Ilara's brain fired instantly, unbidden. Classic transfer pricing scheme, illegal under Section 482 of the Internal Revenue Code. He's creating an artificial loss to offset gains. It's clean, but if they audit the valuation of the subsidiary's assets, he's cooked. She poured the water without breaking stride, her expression unchanged. She'd done it again, analyzed, diagnosed, and convicted them in her head. One day, that instinct would get her into trouble. At 7:25 p.m., the atmosphere in Aurelia shifted. A black, armored Cadillac Escalade, the kind used for heads of state, purred to a stop at the curb. The driver, a man built like a refrigerator, opened the rear door. Julian Croft emerged. He didn't just exit the car, he commanded the sidewalk. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit of midnight blue that probably cost more than Ilara's entire student loan debt. His hair was thick and dark, with a distinguished slash of silver at the temples. He carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no. But his eyes betrayed him. They were the eyes of a man haunted, exhausted, carrying a weight that no amount of money could lift. Behind him, his daughter Isabella stepped out. She was 18, with a fragile, bird-like beauty. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, but she clutched a small, worn, leather-bound book to her chest like a shield. Her eyes, large and brown, darted around, taking in the opulent surroundings with a look that wasn't awe, but something closer to fear. Dimitri practically flew to the door. "Mr. Croft, a pleasure. Welcome back." Julian gave a curt nod. "Dimitri, our usual table." The corner table, of course, tucked away, offering a panoramic view of the city lights, yet shielded from the prying eyes of other diners. As they walked through the restaurant, a wave of whispers followed them. "That's Julian Croft." His daughter, the one who's sick. "They say she can't touch money. Isn't that bizarre?" Julian ignored it all, his hand a firm, protective presence on Isabella's back. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her knuckles white where she gripped her book. Ilara was their server. She approached the table, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She kept her eyes down, her voice a neutral, professional monotone. "Good evening, Mr. Croft, Miss Croft. Welcome to Aurelia. May I get you started with something to drink?" He didn't look at her. He never did. To men like Julian Croft, people like her were part of the furniture. But as she stood there, she noticed the small details her mind couldn't help but catalogue. Isabella had placed her small clutch purse on the floor beside her, not on the table. When Julian slid the heavy, leather-bound menu toward her, her fingers recoiled for a split second before she took it, and when he pulled out a platinum credit card to hand to the sommelier for the wine selection, Isabella flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Aversion, Ilara's mind supplied. Aversion to physical representations of wealth. Julian ordered for both of them. "She'll have the seared scallops and the risotto. I'll have the Wagyu steak, medium rare." He spoke with a quiet tenderness to his daughter, a stark contrast to his public persona. He tried to make her smile, telling her a story about his day, but her eyes remained distant, filled with a sadness so profound it seemed to have no bottom. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you, sweetheart. An early birthday present." He produced a single, crisp, brand-new $100 bill. It was a gesture, Elara guessed, he'd made 1,000 times before. A simple, transactional expression of affection. "For that bookstore you like?" He held it out to her. Isabella stared at the bill as if it were a venomous snake. Her breath quickened. Her hand, pale and trembling, reached out. Her fingers brushed against the corner of the banknote. And then it happened. The silent scream, the arching back, the frantic clawing at her chest. It wasn't a seizure. It wasn't choking. It was something else. A complete, catastrophic system overload. Julian lunged across the table, his face a mask of terror. "Bella, not again! Please, not again!" The dining room exploded. People were shouting. Someone yelled, "Call an ambulance!" A man who identified himself as a doctor rushed forward, trying to check her pulse, but her limbs were flailing. "Is it anaphylaxis? Did she eat something?" Elara's body moved before her mind could protest. She was halfway across the room when she saw it clearly. The pattern, the purse on the floor, the flinch from the menu, the recoil from the credit card. And now, this. The trigger wasn't food. It wasn't an airborne allergen. The trigger was the $100 bill still lying on the white tablecloth. It was insane. It was impossible. But the evidence was right in front of her. A lifetime of training in finding the hidden connection, the anomalous data point, screamed at her. Correlation is not causation, the logical part of her brain argued. "Look at the evidence," the forensic accountant retorted. "Every data point lines up." Her heart pounded. "If I say it, they'll think I'm crazy. They'll ask how I know. They'll look at me. They'll see me." But Isabella's face was turning from blue to a deep, terrifying purple. Her gasps were growing weaker. "5 years ago, you saw a crime and you spoke up. It cost you everything. And if I stay silent now, it will cost this girl her life." Something inside her, a core of integrity she thought had been extinguished long ago, ignited. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. She pushed through the small crowd that had gathered around the table. "Step back," she said, her voice low, but carrying an undeniable weight of command. The doctor looked up, annoyed. "Who are you?" "Get the money away from her," she repeated, her gaze locked on Julian Croft. "What?" he snarled, his eyes wild. "She can't breathe. What are you talking about?" "Her purse," Elara said, pointing to the floor. "Your wallet, the credit card, the bill on the table. Get it all away from her. Put it on that empty table over there. Now." The sheer, unshakable certainty in her voice cut through his panic. He stared at her, his billion-dollar mind trying to process the absurdity of the request. But he was desperate. He would have tried voodoo if he thought it would work. With trembling hands, he scooped up his wallet and the credit cards. He grabbed the $100 bill. He hesitated, then snatched Isabella's purse from the floor. He dumped it all on a vacant table 20 feet away. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Isabella's convulsions continued. The doctor started trying to administer CPR. "No, wait," Elara said, kneeling beside the girl. She ignored the doctor, ignored Julian, ignored the entire gawking restaurant. She looked directly into Isabella's terrified, oxygen-starved eyes. "Isabella," she said, her voice calm and even, a lighthouse in a storm. "It's gone. The money is gone. There is no money here. Look." She pointed toward the empty table. "It's all over there. You're safe. Just breathe. There's nothing here to hurt you." And then, the miracle. Isabella's thrashing began to subside. A shudder ran through her body, and she took a breath. A deep, ragged, life-giving gasp of air that filled her lungs. Then another. The terrifying purple began to recede from her lips, replaced by a pale blue, then a blotchy pink. The silent scream faded from her face, leaving behind an expression of utter exhaustion and confusion. The room was silent, save for the sound of Isabella's ragged breathing and the distant wail of an approaching siren. Julian Croft stared, his mouth agape. He looked from his daughter, now limp but breathing on the floor, to the pile of wallets and purses on the distant table, and then to the waitress who had just saved his daughter's life with a command that made no sense at all. "Who?" he breathed, the word barely a whisper. "Are you?" In that moment, Ilara Vance knew her 5 years of hiding were over, and Julian Croft had no idea he was staring into the eyes of the woman whose life he had methodically and ruthlessly dismantled. The paramedics burst in, their arrival shattering the stunned silence. They were professionals, all brisk movements and clipped questions, but even they slowed as they took in the scene. The billionaire's daughter conscious but dazed on the floor, the other diners staring, and a lone waitress kneeling beside her, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "We got a call about a possible anaphylactic shock," the lead paramedic said, his eyes scanning the room. Julian, his composure returning in fractured pieces, took charge. "She had a respiratory episode. She's stable now, but she needs to go to the hospital." As they loaded Isabella onto a stretcher, the paramedic looked at Ilara. "What did you do? Did you administer an EpiPen?" "No," Ilara said, standing up, her legs feeling like jelly. "I just helped calm her down." The paramedic gave her a skeptical look, but was too focused on his patient to press the issue. Julian grabbed Ilara's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his knuckles white. "That wasn't calming her down," he said, his voice low and intense. "You knew something. 23 specialists, the best in the world, and they know nothing. You saw something. What was it?" Ilara pulled her arm away, her own fear and anger rising like bile in her throat. "Your daughter had a severe psychosomatic reaction. The trigger was proximal currency." Julian blinked. The words were clinical, precise, utterly out of place, coming from a woman in a server's uniform. "Psycho. What? What does that even mean?" "It means her mind is making her body believe it's being poisoned," Ilara said, the explanation pouring out of her, the muscle memory of analysis and reporting taking over. "And the poison is money." Before he could respond, a paramedic called his name. "Mr. Croft, we're ready to transport. Are you riding with us?" Julian was torn. He looked at his daughter, pale and frightened on the gurney, then back at Ilara, a mystery he couldn't begin to fathom. He pulled a thick, heavy business card from his wallet, the same wallet that had nearly killed his daughter minutes ago. He pressed it into her hand. "We are not finished," he said, his voice a low command. "I will call you. You will answer." He didn't wait for a reply, turning and hurrying after the stretcher as it was wheeled out the door. Ilara stood there, the card feeling like a burning coal in her palm. Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Holdings, Inc. The name of the company that had absorbed Sterling and Ross, the company that had orchestrated her downfall. Dimitri rushed over, his face a mixture of awe and terror. "Vance! What in God's name just happened? Mr. Croft's assistant just called. He wants your full name and contact information. He said you might be the only person who can help his daughter." The words landed like a prison sentence. By the time Ilara's shift ended at 2 a.m., she was running on pure adrenaline. She changed in the locker room, her hand shaking so badly she could barely unbutton her uniform. In the bottom of her locker, beneath an old pair of sneakers, was her worn copy of The Principles of Fraud Examination. She touched the cover, the ghost of Elena Vance whispering to her. You saw the pattern. You followed the data. You couldn't help yourself. Back in her apartment, she couldn't sleep. The city lights of Queens cast long shadows on her walls. At 3:17 a.m., she sat at her small, rickety desk and opened her laptop. The screen's glow illuminated her face, tired and drawn. She typed, Isabella Croft illness. The search results were a deluge of tabloid speculation and serious medical journalism. The Billionaire's curse, Croft heiress's bizarre money allergy. Top doctors baffled by Isabella Croft's mystery condition. A psychological prison of gold. Ilara sifted through it all, her mind working with a speed and clarity she hadn't felt in years. She compiled a timeline. 6 months ago, Isabella's episodes begin, mild at first, dizziness, nausea. 5 months ago, Julian Croft announces a massive, hostile takeover of a rival tech firm. Isabella is hospitalized for the first time with acute respiratory distress. 3 months ago, the takeover is finalized. Croft Holdings stock soars. Isabella suffers a near-fatal episode at a charity gala when an auctioneer announces a $10 million donation in her name. The pattern was undeniable. The severity of Isabella's physical reactions was directly correlated to the scale of her father's financial victories. It wasn't just about money, it was about the public, aggressive acquisition of massive wealth. But why? It was a psychological puzzle, and the key was missing. She dug deeper, past the medical articles, into the financial news archives. 5 years ago, the acquisition of Sterling and Ross, the Triton scandal. The articles were brief, sanitized. Sterling and Ross acquired by Croft Holdings. Minor accounting irregularities discovered. Junior partner Elena Vance found responsible for massive fraud. License revoked, facing criminal charges. The charges were later dropped in a quiet settlement, but the damage was done. Her name was ruined. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the date of the Triton scandal report. It was the same week her own father, a small-time investor who had sunk his entire retirement into Triton based on Sterling and Ross's glowing audits, had a fatal heart attack. The stress, the doctor had said, of losing everything. She had never made the connection before. She had blamed herself, her inability to clear her name fast enough. But the man who had signed off on the press release that destroyed her reputation and indirectly killed her father was the same man whose daughter she had just saved. At that same moment, in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Julian Croft was on the phone with his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben. I need a complete workup on a woman named Ilara Vance, Julian said, pacing his vast, silent living room. She's a waitress at Aurelia. But she's not a waitress. I need to know everything. Who she was, where she came from, everything. I want it by sunrise. By 6 a.m., a single encrypted file landed in Julian's inbox. He opened it, a cup of black coffee, untouched beside him. Subject, Ilara Vance. Age 34. Current employment, Aurelia Restaurant. Note, subject's legal name was changed 5 years ago. Previous name, Elena Vance. Julian's blood ran cold. He scrolled down. Former employment, senior forensic partner, Sterling and Ross. License, CPA, CFE, revoked 5 years ago. Associated case file, Triton energy fraud investigation. The name hit him like a physical blow. Elena Vance, the brilliant young accountant. He remembered the meeting. His legal team had presented him with a choice: expose the rot at the core of the company they'd just acquired, triggering a stock collapse and SEC investigation that would cost billions, or find a scapegoat. A junior partner who had flagged the initial discrepancies was the perfect candidate. They could paint her as the mastermind, a lone wolf. It was clean, it was ruthless, it was business. "The evidence is overwhelming," he remembered saying, his voice cold and decisive in the memory of that boardroom. Bury her. He had buried her, and last night she had saved his daughter. The coffee cup slipped from his trembling hand and shattered on the marble floor. In Isabella's private hospital room, Julian sat by her bed, watching her sleep. His sister, Clara, a sharp, empathetic woman who ran the family's philanthropic foundation, sat opposite him. "The doctors are calling it another unexplained episode," Julian said, his voice hollow. "They have no idea what happened or why it stopped." "But the waitress knew," Clara said softly, studying her brother's shattered expression. "You said she knew exactly what to do." "She's not a waitress," Julian whispered, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "She was a forensic accountant, one of the best. Her name is Elena Vance." His voice cracked. "Clara, I'm the one who destroyed her." He told her everything: the Triton scandal, the scapegoat, the calculated decision to ruin an innocent woman to protect his bottom line. Clara's face, usually so gentle, hardened. "My God, Julian, what have you done?" "I built an empire on a lie," he said, the confession tearing from him. "And now my daughter is paying the price." He looked at Isabella, her face so peaceful in sleep, and a terrible understanding dawned. Isabella had been 13 when the Triton scandal broke, old enough to hear the whispers, old enough to understand. "She knows," he breathed. "Somehow she knows. Her sickness. It's guilt. My guilt, living inside her." Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Then you know what you have to do, Julian. It's not about finding a new doctor. It's about finding a way to undo the wrong." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Elara's number. It was time to face the ghost he had created and beg for absolution from the woman he had wronged in every way a person can be wronged. 2 days later, Elara was in the middle of the lunch rush, balancing 3 plates of seared foie gras on her arm, when she felt the change in the room. The ambient chatter died down. The air grew heavy. She looked up. Julian Croft was standing in the entrance. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit. He was dressed in simple dark trousers and a grey cashmere sweater. He looked smaller, diminished, but his presence still filled the space. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing Dimitri, and locked directly onto hers. "I'm here to see Elara Vance," he said, his voice quiet but resonating through the silent restaurant. Dimitri scurried forward. "Mr. Croft, of course. Let me just—" "I'll speak to her now," Julian said, his gaze never leaving Elara. Privately. Every head in the room was turned towards them. Elara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, stripping away her anonymity. She carefully set the plates down on a nearby service station, her hand steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "My break isn't for another hour," she said, her voice cool. "Please," he said. The word was stripped of all its usual authority. It was a genuine plea. Dimitri, utterly bewildered, gestured vaguely. "Elara, take your break. Go." She led him not to a table, but through the swinging kitchen doors, past the startled line cooks and dishwashers, and out into the grimy alley behind the restaurant. The air smelled of garbage and stale grease. It was a world away from the perfumed opulence of the dining room. It was her world. She turned to face him, crossing her arms. "What do you want?" "Your name is Elena Vance," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, heavy with unspoken history. "That name died 5 years ago," she said, her voice flat. "You should know. You were the one who signed the death certificate." Pain flashed across his face. "I know what I did. I know it was wrong. I've spent the last 48 hours reading every file from the Triton case. The real files. I saw what you found. I saw how they framed you. How I framed you. A little late for a crisis of conscience, don't you think?" Ilara's voice was laced with ice. "Did you come here for forgiveness? Because I don't have any to give." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I came here to ask for your help. For Isabella." He looked utterly broken, the titan of industry replaced by a desperate father. "You were right. It's not an allergy. It's the guilt. I think she somehow knows about Triton. About what I did to you. The guilt is manifesting physically. It's killing her." He held out a tablet. "These are her complete medical and psychiatric records. No one else has seen all of it. The doctors are all focused on their own specialties. Neurology, immunology, psychiatry. No one is looking at the whole picture. But you do. You see the patterns everyone else misses. Please, just look." Ilara stared at the tablet, then at the man before her. The man who represented all her pain, all her loss. Helping him felt like a betrayal of her own past, of her father's memory. "Why should I?" she asked, her voice trembling with the effort of keeping her rage in check. "Why should I lift a finger to help the man who destroyed my life?" Julian met her gaze, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because you're not like me, Elena. You're better. You saw a child in pain, and you helped her, even when her father was your worst enemy. You have a conscience. I'm hoping you still have it." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I'll do anything. I'll clear your name. I'll hold a press conference and tell the world the truth about the Triton scandal. I'll restore your license. I'll give you back the life I stole from you. Just, please, save my daughter." The offer hung in the stale alley air between them. It was everything she had ever wanted. Her name, her career, her life back. But the price was helping the man who had taken it all away. She looked at his face, stripped bare of its power and arrogance, and saw only a father's agony. And in that agony, she saw a reflection of her own grief. He was losing his child. She had lost her father. Their tragedies, born from the same source, were now inextricably linked. With a hand that shook slightly, she reached out and took the tablet. "I'm not making any promises," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the kitchen's exhaust fans. "And this isn't for you." For the next 72 hours, Ilara didn't sleep. She consumed the data on the tablet like a starving woman. Hundreds of files. Doctor's notes, MRI scans, blood panels, psychiatric evaluations. She ignored the medical jargon and focused on the metadata. Dates, times, locations. She cross-referenced every one of Isabella's episodes with Julian's business calendar and the stock market ticker for Croft Holdings. The pattern was even clearer and more terrifying than she had imagined. Isabella's first mild attack, a panic attack at school, occurred on the exact day Julian gave a ruthless interview to the Wall Street Journal, boasting about his scorched earth business tactics. A severe respiratory event coincided with the day Croft Holdings won a predatory lawsuit that bankrupted a smaller, family-owned company. Her near-fatal collapse at the gala. It was the 5-year anniversary of the day the Triton scandal broke, and Elena Vance's name was ruined. It wasn't just guilt. It was a penance. Isabella's subconscious had created a brutal, physical manifestation of the moral cost of the Croft family fortune. Her body was trying to reject the very wealth that was built on a foundation of lies and human suffering. The suffering of people like Elara. She found the note from a child psychologist, buried deep in the files, from 4 years ago. Isabella, age 14, exhibits extreme anxiety related to family's public image, expressed feelings of drowning in secrets, recommended family therapy. The recommendation was marked, declined by father. Julian had ignored the warning signs. He had thrown money and doctors at the problem, refusing to see the wound at the very heart of his family. Elara picked up the phone. She knew what she had to do. The solution wasn't medical or financial, it was forensic. She had to uncover the truth, not of a balance sheet, but of a family's soul. "Julian," she said when he answered on the first ring, "I know what's wrong with Isabella, and I think I know how to fix it. But it's not going to be a consultation, it's going to be an audit of you, and you're not going to like what I find." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, his voice, stripped of everything but desperation. "Whatever it takes." Their first session took place not in an office, but in the sterile quiet of the hospital waiting room. Elara had a notebook, Julian a multi-billion-dollar empire, and a universe of regret. "We start at the beginning," Elara said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was the same tone she'd used to interrogate CEOs accused of fraud. "The Triton deal. Walk me through it. Not the version you gave the press. The truth." Hesitantly at first, then with a flood of pent-up confession, Julian talked. He spoke of the pressure from the board, the fear of a stock collapse, the cold, pragmatic calculus that led him to sacrifice a single, unknown accountant to save his company. He didn't make excuses. For the first time, perhaps in his entire life, he was utterly, brutally honest. As he spoke, Elara wasn't just listening. She was watching. She saw the way his jaw tightened when he mentioned the name of his former head of legal, Marcus Thorne, the man who had engineered the cover-up. She noted the flicker of shame in his eyes when he admitted to personally leaking the falsified documents to the press. "Thorne," she said, cutting him off. "He's still with your company?" "Yes," Julian admitted. "Executive Vice President, my right-hand man." "He needs to be your first confession," Elara stated. "You need to confront him, and you need to record it." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and legally perilous. But Julian agreed without hesitation. The next day, he called Marcus Thorne to his penthouse office for an urgent strategy meeting. A tiny recording device, provided by a private investigator Elara had hired with Julian's money, was concealed in his pen. "Marcus," Julian began, his voice strained. "We need to talk about Triton." Thorne, a sleek, silver-haired man with the predatory stillness of a shark, smiled thinly. "Ancient history, Julian. One of our greatest successes." "A success built on a lie," Julian said, his voice gaining strength. "We destroyed an innocent woman, Elena Vance." Thorne's smile didn't waver. "She was necessary collateral damage, a small price to pay for stabilizing the acquisition and saving this company $5 billion. You knew the stakes. You signed off on it yourself." "I want to fix it," Julian said. "I'm going to go public. Tell the truth." The smile vanished from Thorne's face. "Are you insane? That's corporate suicide. It would open us up to shareholder lawsuits, an SEC investigation. It would destroy us. It would destroy you, The board would have your head. I would have your head. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. The official story stands. Elena Vance was a criminal. We were the victims, and you will stick to that story. The recording was damning. It was the first piece of concrete evidence Ilara had to unravel the conspiracy. But it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, Isabella's condition was volatile. She was stable, but fragile. Any mention of her father's business, any news report on the television in her room about the stock market, sent her heart rate soaring. Ilara began visiting her, not as a consultant, but as a stranger who seemed to understand. She never talked about money. She talked about books, about art, about the cracks in the ceiling of her apartment in Queens. She brought Isabella the worn, leather-bound book from the restaurant, a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. "I find," Ilara said softly, placing it on the bedside table, "that sometimes the oldest words have the most comfort." Isabella, who hadn't communicated with anyone but her father for months, picked up her own iPad and slowly typed a message. "Why are you helping us?" Ilara looked at the frail, sad girl in the hospital bed and saw a fellow prisoner. "Because I think we were both locked in the same cage, just on different sides of the bars." The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Ilara was reviewing the visitor logs from Isabella's first hospitalization. One name appeared repeatedly: Clara Croft, Julian's sister, the philanthropist. Ilara requested a meeting. They met at a small, anonymous coffee shop. Clara was elegant and composed, but her eyes were filled with a deep well of sadness. "You know what Julian did?" Ilara said, getting straight to the point. Clara nodded slowly. "I didn't know the details until recently. I only knew that the period after the Sterling and Ross acquisition was dark. Julian changed, and Isabella, she started to withdraw. She knew," Ilara said. "She was 13. She must have overheard something. A phone call. An argument." Clara's composure finally broke. A tear slipped down her cheek. "It was worse than that," she whispered. "It was me. I was on the phone with Julian, arguing with him about what he was doing. I was shouting. I told him he was destroying an innocent person's life for money. I didn't know Isabella was in the next room, listening to every word. That was it. The inciting incident. The moment the poison entered Isabella's system. The moment her father, her hero, was revealed to be a villain in the story of another woman's life. A woman named Elena Vance. "She's been carrying your secret ever since," Ilara said, the pieces clicking into place, and her body finally broke under the weight of it. Armed with Thorne's confession and Clara's testimony, Ilara knew the final piece of the audit had to be the truth. Not just for the public, but for Isabella. But Marcus Thorne was fighting back. Tipped off by a loyalist on Julian's staff that he was being investigated, Thorne made a preemptive strike. He leaked a story to a notorious gossip blog. Disgraced and delicensed accountant Elena Vance, now waitress Ilara Vance, is treating Billionaire's daughter Isabella Croft. Practicing medicine without a license? Sources say the medical board is investigating. The next morning, a cease and desist letter arrived at Ilara's apartment, delivered by a courier. It was from the state licensing board, warning her of criminal prosecution if she continued to have any contact with Isabella Croft. Thorne was trying to box her in, to sever her connection to the one person who could expose him. At the same time, Julian received a call from the hospital. "Mr. Croft, Isabella has had a setback. She saw a news report on her tablet about this waitress. Her vitals are crashing. We've had to sedate her." The walls were closing in. Thorne's maneuver had turned Ilara's help into a weapon against Isabella. Any contact from her now could literally kill the girl. Julian called Elara, his voice a raw whisper of despair. He's won. Thorn has won. If you see her, it could trigger another episode. If you don't, she's trapped. What do we do? Elara stood in her small apartment, the cease and desist letter in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked at the faded photograph of her younger, hopeful self. That woman had believed in the power of truth. She had lost everything for it. He hasn't won yet, she said, a cold, hard resolve solidifying within her. He thinks the truth is the weapon that will destroy us. But he's wrong. The truth is the only thing that can set her free. We're not going to leak a story or fight him in the shadows. We're going to hold a press conference. And you, Julian, are going to confess everything. It will be the end of my company, Julian said quietly. Yes, Elara replied. It might be. But it's the only way to save your daughter. Here's the question that changes everything. Is what Elara doing an act of supreme forgiveness, or is it the ultimate act of forensic accounting, a final, public balancing of the books where every debt is paid in full, no matter the cost? Is this about healing, or is it about justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because understanding her motivation is the key to this final, high-stakes move. And if you haven't subscribed, now is the time. The next chapter isn't a quiet resolution, it's a public execution. Let's go. The press conference was set for the following day at the Croft Holdings headquarters. The ballroom, usually reserved for celebrating corporate triumphs, was now staged for a public immolation. A single podium stood before a sea of cameras and reporters, sharks that had smelled blood in the water. The night before, Elara sat with Julian in his sterilely modern penthouse, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of fallen stars. He was a ghost, haunting his own life, pacing back and forth, rehearsing the statement he was about to make. It has to be your words, Julian, Elara said, watching him. Not from a script written by lawyers. It has to be the truth you told me in the alley. They will crucify me, he said, stopping to look at her. Thorn has already rallied the board. They'll vote to oust me by noon tomorrow. Let them, Elara said calmly. This isn't about your company anymore. This is about the balance sheet of your life. It's been running at a moral deficit for 5 years. It's time to pay it down. He finally nodded, slumping into a chair. And you? What happens to you after this? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I'll finally be free. Or maybe I'll just be a waitress with a famous backstory. On the morning of the press conference, Marcus Thorn made his final move. He filed an emergency injunction, citing Elara's revoked license and the cease and desist order to legally bar her from appearing at the press conference or having any contact with the Croft family. He claimed she was an unstable influence, extorting a grieving father. A process server delivered the papers to her apartment at 8 a.m. She was legally silenced. She called Julian. He's cut me off. I can't be there. Then I'll do it alone, Julian said, his voice surprisingly firm. You gave me the map, Elena. I have to walk the rest of the way myself. At 10 a.m., Julian Croft walked to the podium. He looked 10 years older. He adjusted the microphone, and a hush fell over the room. Good morning, he began, his voice steady. I am here today to correct the record on a matter of great importance. 5 years ago, my company, Croft Holdings, acquired the firm Sterling and Ross. In the process, we uncovered a massive fraud scheme at a subsidiary called Triton Energy. At the time, we named a junior partner, Ms. Elena Vance, as the architect of that fraud. He took a deep breath. The cameras flashed. That was a lie, A collective gasp went through the room. Ms. Vance was not the perpetrator. She was the whistleblower. She discovered the fraud and tried to report it. In a decision I approved, my executive team, led by Marcus Thorne, chose to frame Ms. Vance to avoid a corporate scandal and protect our stock price. We fabricated evidence. We ruined an innocent woman's life, her career, and her reputation. I am here today to state, unequivocally, that Elena Vance is a hero, and I am a coward and a liar. He went on, detailing the entire cover-up, his voice never wavering. He announced he was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, and that he would be submitting all evidence, including a recorded confession from Marcus Thorne to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office. In her hospital room, Isabella Croft was watching the live feed on her tablet, her Aunt Clara by her side. As her father's confession poured out, something shifted in her eyes. The deep, abiding terror that had lived there for years began to recede. She looked at the image of her father, broken and exposed, but finally telling the truth. And for the first time in 6 months, her expression softened. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Croft Holdings stock plummeted 60% before trading was halted. Marcus Thorne was arrested in his office before the press conference was even over. The business world was in an uproar, but in her small apartment, Ilara felt a strange sense of quiet. The injunction lay on her table, a useless piece of paper now. Thorne's power was gone. She watched the news reports, the endless loop of Julian's confession, and felt not triumph, but a profound, aching sadness. So much damage, so much pain, all for numbers on a page. A week later, a large manila envelope arrived for her. It contained no letter, just 2 documents. The first was a formal notice from the State Licensing Board, stating that in light of new evidence, the revocation of her CPA license had been overturned, effective immediately. Her name, Elena Vance, was cleared. The second was a check. It was a cashier's check, drawn from Julian Croft's personal account for $10 million. Ilara stared at it. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. It could solve all her problems. Her mother's care, her debts, a new life. It was restitution. It was blood money. It was everything she had fought against. She picked up a pen, and without a moment's hesitation, she wrote void in large, clear letters across the face of the check. She put it in a new envelope and mailed it back to Julian Croft's penthouse. Her healing, she knew, could not be bought. It had to be earned. The process of rebuilding was slow and messy. Julian Croft faced a barrage of shareholder lawsuits and a lengthy SEC investigation. He lost his company, his seat on numerous boards, and a significant portion of his fortune. He sold the penthouse and moved into a smaller, far more modest apartment. He started volunteering at a soup kitchen in the Bronx. He was, for the first time, invisible. And for the first time, he seemed at peace. Isabella was discharged from the hospital. Her physical symptoms vanished almost overnight, but the psychological scars remained. She entered intensive therapy, learning to untangle her identity from her family's wealth and its toxic legacy. She started taking classes at a community college, studying art history. One afternoon, she walked into a bookstore and bought a paperback with a crumpled $5 bill. Her hand didn't even tremble. Ilara, now Elena again, did not return to the world of corporate finance. The thought of it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Instead, she used her restored credentials to open a small, non-profit consultancy, the Vance Foundation for Financial Justice. She worked pro bono, helping ordinary people, victims of predatory lending, pension fraud, and corporate malfeasance, fight back against the powerful. She found her purpose not in maximizing profits, but in balancing the scales. Her work didn't make her rich, but for the first time in years, the numbers in her life finally added up. 6 months after the press conference, she was working late in her small, cluttered office when there was a knock on the door. It was Julian. He looked thinner, his expensive clothes replaced by a simple jacket and jeans, but his eyes were clear. He didn't apologize again. The words were no longer necessary. He simply handed her a small, paper-wrapped package. "It's from Isabella," he said. "She made it for you." Elena unwrapped it. It was a small, beautifully rendered charcoal drawing. It depicted a woman in a waitress's uniform, standing in a grimy alley, with the glittering skyline of New York City reflected in a puddle at her feet. The woman's face was determined, her gaze fixed on the light. "She's doing well," Julian said quietly. "She talks now, a lot." He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Thank you, Elena. I didn't do it for you, Julian," she said, her voice soft. "I know," he replied. "That's why it worked." He turned and left. Elena stood there for a long time, holding the drawing. She looked around her small office, at the stacks of files representing lives upended by greed. The work was endless. The fight was far from over. But as she looked at the drawing, at the woman in the alley staring toward the light, she felt a sense of profound peace settle over her. The books were finally balanced.